Level Up and Live, where we explore the inspiring journeys of individuals who've overcome adversity to achieve greatness. I'm your host, Sean Myers, joined by my co-host, Ewan. And today, we have the honor of speaking with the incredible Todd Blyleven. Todd's story is one of resilience, faith, and transformation. From professional baseball to corporate leadership, he's navigated life's challenges with grace and courage. Join us as we dive into Todd's journey from his heroic actions during the Las Vegas mass shooting to his battle with PTSD and his journey to healing through resilience and faith.
Todd Blyleven, thank you so much for being on the show today. We're super excited. There's so many different directions of how I could start this. Your EMDR, I'm going to start with that because I'm super excited to hear about your experience with that. But how you got to that is there's a tragic story behind, and most people will know the event that happened, but you experienced it. And so we can't wait to hear that. You're a professional baseball player. You've got so much experience in multiple different areas of life. You've got a song coming out here at some point that you wrote, and we're going to be excited to hear that and promote that when it comes out. But if you could give us some insight to some of the things we just said there, and we can jump in and get to hear your wisdom and knowledge.
Yeah, no, well, first of all, thank you for having me on your amazing podcast and platform. I've listened to a couple of your shows, and I just really love the synergy you guys put out, and just really getting into the guest's mind and extracting all that knowledge. So, congratulations on where you're at, and thank you for having me on. Thanks. I think if I back up, where I started was I was born into the Major League Baseball world with my dad, Burt Blyleven, playing for 23 years, and had the opportunity as a young kid, really up until about my high school days, to travel around with him and the team nonstop. I mean, most of it, in terms of like my schooling, most of that time was spent in a clubhouse, doing my homework in Chicago, turning it in Pittsburgh or wherever we were going. They'd have tutors that would come to the hotels, and a lot of us kids at that time were on this kind of Major League Baseball schooling program. And it was just awesome. It was so cool that my dad allowed me to go with him. And I learned a lot from just being around these grown individuals that were achieving the ultimate success in their lives, right? They were the one percenters. That was pretty fun to watch, like them fail, how they succeeded, the celebration, the nightly, and then the next day they lose, and the quiet, So I took a lot of that into my own growing up, and obviously having that ambition to play professional baseball. I was able to achieve that status in terms of playing at the minor league, and then, the up and down level. I became a Major League Baseball scout when my days of playing just kind of came to an end, where I knew I was trying everything I possibly could, but I wasn't going to get to that level like my dad did. And so you start now trying to like redefine your own success of where you are, which is really, really difficult. And I think that was probably one of my first points of my life where I realized I'm in a mass depressive state. I'm trying to figure this out. How do I navigate through this? I have my whole life to live. I'm only 25 years older of whatever it was when I got out. And so I got back into Major League Baseball, which was awesome, understanding the operations side, which then led into, having a family and wanting to be home. And so I'm fast forwarding through a lot of this, but I ended up getting into the corporate space of sports, and all of that kind of circumvented through me being a scout, doing lessons, working with athletes, helping players understand and helping them navigate where they should go, understanding the reality of what happens when you become a professional athlete, the sacrifices you have to make, right? And then I'm giving lessons to a kid that his dad is the CEO of a giant sports company, and says, hey man, like, you've created a lot of friends in your world. Your networking is probably huge. Why don't you come work for me and be one of my business development people? And I'm like, I don't even know what business development is. I mean, I studied it in college, but not in the real world. And at that point too, I think mentally I was I always thought I'm either a coach, I'm a player, or I'm a scout. Like, what else can I do in my life? And so he opened up doors to me on the corporate side, which just absolutely amazing. And I've had a great run there on the marketing side with some global partnership stuff, and had a lot of fun. But through all of that, even in that moment, you're trying to redefine your own success within the boardroom. And how do you replicate putting a great presentation on that you've been working on for 3 months, or building a partnership, and then you're presenting this to your organization or your boss, and there's no high fives, there's no Gatorades being poured over you, there's no like jumping down the hall and going, yeah, or that post game meal where it's just the best thing you've had because you just won. And all of a sudden, like, there's not that feeling, right? It's go back to the desk and you're sitting there and you're having this own internal success kind of moment. And then you're back to the grind. And that was really hard for me to try to understand as an athlete, how to get into that mode of you're not going to get that. And how do you kind of create that stuff internally, right? So I really struggled with that, carried over into my family stuff, and me trying to just be the best I could to try to replicate that post-game success, striking out the side or whatever that feeling is. And it wasn't until we went to Vegas, my marriage, just everything. So we go to Vegas in October of 2017. And unfortunately, we're at a concert where, there was a gunman 32 stories up across the street, and decided that he's going to go ahead and shoot down on 26,000 people. And we were right in the middle of it, and we can go into that if you like. But I think just to summarize, and we can revisit based on what you would like to ask and what your audience might want to know about more. But essentially, I was able to get a lot of people out, and through that traumatic experience, after 8 hours of going back and forth, I had individuals come to me that I had met through my networking over the years that were military combat vets, first responders, that basically rallied up and lifted me up and said, hey man, like, this is what's going to happen to you. And they introduced me to EMDR therapy, and never even heard about that. Never really, the only therapy I'd really had was I had a little bit of personal therapy to try to understand how I can be a better husband, how I can learn how to redefine my success, right? Because I was really struggling with that earlier, a number of years prior to that. So going into EMDR therapy was just absolutely, it was groundbreaking to me on how it worked. Here I'm holding these vibrating paddles, and she's explaining how it's going to knock my left and right brain back and forth, and it's going to jar out some of these memories that I just had from this traumatic, crazy event, because your brain is sitting there saying, okay, how are you supposed to process that stuff when I wasn't even prepared for that? I wasn't trained in combat, and here I saw these horrific things. So your mind basically protects you and lets out little information at a time to be able to allow you to process that, right, internally, and live your life, or at least attempt to. And what most people don't end up getting an opportunity to do is they feel the skull, you're knocking on the back of your skull. They feel the headaches. They don't know how to release this. They can't remember where their boots took them in a certain traumatic event, because that's your mind protecting you. So what EMDR did was it allowed that drawbridge to slowly open, and my therapist guided me through the intensity of the vibrations as I'm telling the story. She allowed me to lower that drawbridge, allow a minute of time or 2 minutes of time to come out, and then she would close it. And then we would talk about that minute or 2 minutes that I would recall now that happened, and I would be allowed to process that, which I was raised to suppress all my emotions, raised tough as an athlete. If you fall, you're hurt, you're depressed, whatever, you don't say anything about it. You go on with a broken rib and pitch or whatever that is, right? Well, now all of a sudden I'm finding myself in this room with this woman that I completely trust, and I'm able to tell and talk more about what happened in that minute or 2 minutes, categorize it, put it up on a shelf in a little black box. And 1 minute after another, after a year and a half, I'm able to now recount where all my steps took me. I'm able to process where that is. And now my trauma is sitting out in front of me where I can bob and weave when I'm feeling kind of that spidey sense in a crowded place or whatever, where I'm feeling a little bit of anxiety. I can now adjust my setting and go outside for a minute or refocus, go into the restroom where it's quiet and recenter myself. So EMDR was just absolutely amazing to me. And I recommend it to anyone that's suffering through any type of trauma, car accident. It doesn't have to be a mass shooting, obviously, but there's my longer story for you. But yeah, EMDR was awesome. So
what does MDR stand for, Todd?
EMDR, it's eye movement displacement response, I think. Now you're quizzing.
Yeah, I think that's it. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I wanted to back up a little bit, man. So you had mentioned baseball, and I was reading your bio, and I resonate with that. So I played at SFA, Stephen F. Austin State University.
Yeah.
And played there. It was probably one of the best few years of my life. I really had a transformation in my personality. I was kind of shy, timid, didn't really speak out, in high school. So when I got to college, it really opened me up, and especially being a part of baseball, right? It's almost like a fraternity in itself, allowed me to mold other personalities that were there. So when you were in baseball and you played in the minors, and did you end up playing in the professionals, the MLB?
Yeah, just for a short stint.
Sure. What team?
Pirates.
Awesome. You know Andrew Kashner? Andrew Kashner ring a bell?
Yeah, no, I don't think we've ever met, but yes.
Yeah. Okay. I went to high school with him at Conroe High School in Texas. So anyways, just a quick note there. But when you went from the minors and the major leagues, you had made a comment earlier that there was a difference. There was a separator from the guys that played in the minors, right? So you have your high school baseball, then you go to college, and then this percentages just get smaller and smaller and smaller. From your experience, you were a major league scout, which is fantastic, which is phenomenal, right? Which is awesome. Because as a baseball player myself, we had always, where's the scouts? They're in the stands. They had the radars, it was such a cool experience. And now I'm getting to talk to one. But what from your experience, what was the key separator from the guys that played in the minors that never made it up to the major leagues and the ones that did make it to the major leagues? Because there's that small percentage from your experience. What was the separator?
Well, I think your title on what you guys are doing with Level Up and Live is exactly what that is. It's leveling yourself up, realizing I'm at the maximum piece of I'm working out. I'm doing all the things I need to do in the grind of getting myself prepared to go out and compete, right? And I'm doing the best I can, but how can I level myself up one more time? And how can I then create a routine where I start to live that pattern? And you look at some of the greats, and I've been around them. My dad's in the Hall of Fame. I've thrown bullpens next to guys like Nolan Ryan and all types of different guys. Hit with Kirby Puckett and Dave Winfield, and interview Pujols. I mean, you look at all the great players. There's a routine that happens, right? They realize what works for them, where they're dominant at, and then they focus solely on recreating that dominance every single day, and then tackling the little things that they can and not trying to reinvent their wheel all the time. You look at like a great hitter, right? I was watching Manny Machado last night. Machado's got an open stance. It's pretty signature of him for a long, long time. He hasn't really changed that, right? Why would he change it? He's at the pinnacle peak of where he wants to be. He's making all the money. He's got the big name. He's going out, he's playing consistently, and he's having success. So why go back and try to change those things? Too many young athletes or minor league players, you're constantly in the grind of trying to impress every single game. You don't know, like you brought up, if I'm showing up to your ball game and I'm a major league scout, I'm coming out to see you because I already heard you're pretty good. I'm not trying to see you reinvent yourself on the field. I just want to, hey, show me what you got. I want to see the grit and the grind and the mechanical aspect of the game and where you are should be consistent because all the hours you're putting in training, you're working with private coaches, you're throwing a ball or, whatever that is with your dad or mom in the backyard or somewhere, but you're constantly working on your game. So that to me is the separator, what you guys are talking about. I'm going to level up myself. I'm going to level up my game to get to a point where I truly understand who I am as an athlete. And then I'm going to live that every single day, every single step I take. That's mine. I'm going to own it. I'm going to command it. And that's the separator when you go out and you watch those guys that do that. They portray that. I saw Adam Jones, one of the first scouts to watch him in San Diego. He was at Morse High School. I believe that's what high school he went to. Kind of not a great area in San Diego where he grew up. And there I am. I'm getting escorted out to the back of this school, by one of their security people on campus. And I'm watching, you're watching this game of high school athletes. And then here comes Adam Jones. The way he's running, the way he's got that confidence, his ability, right? Everything about him showed that, like one of your guests that you had on, Anthony Trucks, that said, it's not a surprise. If you grew up with Adam Jones, you're not surprised that he's where he's at because he probably put all the work in. There's no surprise that he's a big league player or that he had total success, right? It would be a surprise if somebody that didn't work. Strasburg is a great example. Strasburg apparently as a young kid didn't really work at his craft up until he got to San Diego State. And then he became a beast, right? I signed Troy Tulowitzki when Tulowitzki at a Long Beach State. Tulowitzki is one of the greatest players, I think, of the game. I think injuries prohibited him to become, what I think he could have been in terms of the legend status of it. But there wasn't a person that worked harder than Troy Tulowitzki on his game, his leadership skills, his ability on and off the field to go and get and level himself up and to live that major league lifestyle. I mean, and if I can keep going, I think you look at what Troy Tulowitzki did, like his first game. You got Todd Helton, Preston Wilson. You got all these great players that have veterans in the Colorado Rocky clubhouse. And Troy Tulowitzki on the first game is lifting and the bus is supposed to be leaving. And everybody's like, where is that rookie kid at? And he's lifting after the game. And they were like, what are you doing? He goes, I got my routine. And he knew it, right? And here's this young kid that is supposed to be listening to all the veterans, and he's now reshaping. So guess what happens? All the veterans are like, I better level up. I better start living this, right? Because like my dad always said, to him, getting to the big leagues was tough, but the more difficult part was staying there every single day. That's the challenge.
They say success it looks exciting watching it, but those who are creating success, it's not exciting. It should be very boring. Success is boring because you are repeating the same thing over. If you want to get rich, it's easy to get rich. It's super boring. You just keep investing, right? There's no magic to it. Like you keep tweaking and changing your investment strategies and styles, you lose because it's longevity, right? And it's the same with eating food. You want to be mega fit and from an eating perspective, you just keep eating the same boring stuff and you will have the body of your dreams. I mean, it's just the way it is. It's boring, but it's very difficult to stay in that kind of shape, to continue to do the boring. Human beings, the monotonous, it kills us. We want that novelty, the dopamine, And so, yeah, it takes great discipline and I know it. Can I always execute? Well, that's what my mission is to level up. And you said, when you came out, when you finally realized that you weren't going to continue being a Major League Baseball player, you went through that depression phase, like at 25 years old. And so that's a slump, right? Like you going through this thing, and that happens to entrepreneurs, business owners, high level executives, right? They go through these slumps. You got through that? I think you maybe said through therapy, but then you went to the corporate world. Did you experience similar? Did you go through any kind of slumps? And how do you view that now? Because you've gone through some major ones, man, and you've got the experience. Like most people will probably never get to be even close to Major League Baseball. Most people will never get close to having to go through that traumatic experience, and you're at a high level in the corporate world. So like, how would you go through those difficult times and get back up?
Oh man, I've been knocked down so many times. It's not even funny. You start out working for a company that you really love, but the company I started working with, I was driving an hour and a half to 2 hours each way to get to, right? Then all of a sudden you get an opportunity to work a mile down the road from your house, and the same type of job, same environment, same corporate piece. And it's going to be easier. I can be a coach now with my kids. I can be home more with my wife. I can say goodnight to everybody. So I do that, right? Leap of faith. I love that company. I worked there for about 5 years, but then your kids are getting older, so you want a life change. So you move from one state to another, chasing another job, right? And that job should be similar, and all of a sudden that job doesn't work out, and you go through a traumatic experience like I went through in Vegas, where now I am completely like mush in my mind, and I can't really function all that well. In fact, when we got back from Vegas, I didn't realize how much it really affected me, but a song from Jason Aldean came on the radio on Fridays. They played music inside this office building where I was at, and a song came on with him singing it. I found myself a quarter mile down the road because I had run out of the building. I had started running away from this noise because I couldn't handle it, because it put me right back to where I was at, and I didn't want to be there. And so how do you function through that, right? Well, then you, through help, peer support, EMDR therapy, all these things, you pick yourself back up. But now you're in a position where, now what do I do? So you start a consultancy. I'm going to rely on all the work that I've done. I'm going to try to work at home so I can recreate my environment that I can control. I started diving into sports technology. I've been a sports technology expert for a long time. I really got nerdy into the analytical space and metric space. But, I built a scouting app that's one of a kind in baseball that marries objective to objective metrics using behavioral science. So I really got into that, and that allowed me to process my own trauma, right? Dive into kind of my nerd ability to get into analytics and create a solution that wasn't there in the scouting space. But then it was like one job after another. Well, then the job that I went to declared bankruptcy, basically. So now I've got to reshift. And then I go to another job. Well, then COVID hits. And then COVID, because of the COVID piece, their distribution, with their product line. So now I'm getting laid off there, and I'm jobless, basically, almost a whole year, where I'm consulting, I'm fighting, I'm relying on what I've built, my network, and I'm doing whatever I can to try to find this normal job, build a business, do whatever I can to support my family. So it's this constant getting knocked down left and right, and trying to maintain, like what your podcast is all about, that level up and live, right? And it was hard, and it's still hard. I mean, every day, every single day, I'm a big faith believer. I'm huge in my faith, and every day, man, I'm stepping outside and I'm like absorbing the strength, and I'm trying to just build myself up to keep myself going and moving my boots forward. It is funny, my dog, we have a shepherd, and she does the same thing with me. She'll jump up on our jacuzzi kind of ledge, and I'll put my left leg up, and we'll just pray, and just, really pray for strength and a lot more love in this world, obviously. But just that God provides that patience for me, and that strength and that uplift to keep moving, just like I did in Vegas, just like I did when I, moved that transition from professional athlete into the real world, just like I did when my son was born or my daughter was born. And, you get knocked down in multiple areas of your life, and I won't stop. And all that grind has gotten me to where I am right now, in a very happy place, working for an amazing company, still consulting on the side, and now working with first responder and military institutions and agencies across the country, and on advisory council boards, helping first responders deal with their trauma and what they're doing. And it's just uplifting, man. So I'm trying to give back where I can, and just continue to keep the grind up and fight and stay positive.
What, man, that's beautiful. What I'm hearing you say and the way I'm receiving it is we preach a lot and we talk a lot about having your vision, your purpose. And you've mentioned it multiple times now, because a lot of times we're all human beings, right? We're imperfect. We go through trials and tribulations and traumas and obstacles and struggles and challenges. But what keeps us going, right? What is sustainable? Because we all have those ups and downs, right? And it's how we react to it, in my opinion. And what I have found is that I call it the North Star, right? If you focus on that purpose, and it sounds like that's where you're at, man, which is a beautiful place. Like, you're serving and you're impacting on a daily basis. So, which is a beautiful place to be. And somebody listening to this, that they go through these different seasons of life, and I'm a big gratitude guy. So when we get in these moments of down, when we get in these moments of sad, angry, I always tend to go back to, okay, what am I grateful for? What do I have? Do I have a roof over my head? And when I focus on that, right, that's where where energy flows. That's where focus goes, energy flows. And so I'm curious with you, Todd, transitioning and the way you're showing up on a daily basis. Like, when I was looking at your bio and some of the things that you've done, obviously it's to me, like, it speaks high volume, like what you're doing and serving and impacting with the podcast. And I also noticed, and I even asked Ewan before the podcast, I said, well, he was on TEDx. And we had another guest on here, Olivia Atkins. She had done a TEDx, but it didn't really hit me. I was just like, oh, okay, cool. Speaking engagement. But I didn't know what TEDx, I didn't know what it was. Right. And I'd heard the gentleman that had built it on another podcast. And then I saw you on the TEDx, and I'm curious, if there's other listeners out there that resonate, like, what is TEDx? Can you elaborate or maybe even the why you did TEDx? Because I'll be completely transparent with you. Like, that kind of scares me a little bit. Like, man, if I'm going to go out there and serve an impact, I
want to be respectful.
So TEDx, you have this North Star. You're getting up every single day. You're facing challenges. You're facing struggles, just like we all do. But you have that North Star and why you do it, right? And so I'm curious, can you speak to a little bit about TEDx and why you ended up doing that? Because if I'm being completely transparent, that scares me a little bit, right? Doing something like that.
Yeah, TEDx was so it's kind of interesting. I mean, your reference on the North Star part, you're always trying to get to this pinnacle peak or follow a line, right? And I finally got to that point, and just taking me outside the sports corporate side and putting me in the mental health side of my passion and giving back. I did a podcast with a first responder group called Fairfield County Trauma Response Team. It was amazing. David Doshinger and Bonnie Rumele are doing a lot of great things in the first responder space. And so they had me on their podcast. I was, a civilian, and a lot of their guests are obviously first responders that have dealt with certain traumatic incidences. And so they wanted me to focus more on the aftermath. So it wasn't just telling my story of what happened in Las Vegas. It was where my boots took me after. How was I able to stand back up after going through something like that? I mean, I spoke to a Vietnam vet just yesterday, a good friend of mine. He said, I was over in Nam. He said, I was shot at a couple of times. I went through some stuff. He goes, I'm going to be honest with you, though. He said, I didn't go through what you went through. I was never in that place. And I've heard that a lot from a lot of first responders, SEAL members, like, hey, you've experienced what we have experienced in certain areas of that moment of chaos and the tragedy and the trauma and everything else, the life and death. I've experienced that. So I can walk through those valleys with those people that have experienced that crazy trauma. But what they wanted me to focus on was the aftermath. And so I did this podcast. Well, TEDx and those people ended up listening to that podcast. Someone passed it over. And through Olivia Atkins and our relationship and everything else, all of a sudden I get this call to be a TEDx speaker. And it was awesome. The process of it was great. I mean, you're learning how to tell a story in 10 minutes. Obviously, like, you want to be able to share everything. Because when I go back and I talk about like Vegas and the trauma, there was obviously death and there was obviously horrifying, crazy, terrifying moments in that 8 hours that I was going back and forth helping people. But there was an uplift of love. There was faith. There was a presence of strength and unity. And, you go back to, unfortunately, like our time when, in New York, when the buildings collapsed and how the aftermath of the rally of the United States or just civilians in across the globe, rising up against tyranny, right? And being together, that feeling of the togetherness, that's what that moment was all about. And I wanted to try to encapsulate that and try to bring that to light on stage. And so obviously, like, you tell a story of my 13-second memory that I always think about every single day. And this reshapes my existence of what's important to me is, I carried a woman out and she didn't make it. And there I am, I'm on one knee and I'm looking at her and she lost her life. And so all I'm trying to do is be as gentle as I can and lay her down. And then I'm standing back up and I'm looking down at my boots and I'm looking at her and I look up to God and I just say, please just give me the strength to keep moving. I need to get back in. And so you all of a sudden in that moment find the courage through my strength and through my power and my faith to run back in and continue to grind and do whatever I can until either I'm going to fall because of something that's going to hit me, or I'm going to be just purely exhausted that I can't do it anymore and I'm not going to give up. And so in that moment, in that TEDx speech and everything else, I think that's what people are looking for. They're looking for, yes, we've all experienced stuff in our lives, but how did you walk through it? I talked to Devin Smeltzer, a cancer survivor at 9 years old, left-handed pitcher with the Marlins. I think he's in AAA right now. But he beat cancer at 10 years old. And his heroes were the survivors. All the players, Chase Utley's and all those guys used to come in with the uniforms and they do all that amazing stuff to uplift those children in those cancer wards and all that stuff. And you need to do that. Every athlete, every person of some sort of celebrity status needs to give back in that way. But it's the survivors. It's the stories that they can tell on the grind, the level up and how they lived in that battling whatever, they're battling, the trauma. What did I do after a car accident? And how did you get back into the car and drive? How did you go back into work? Dave Sanderson was on Miracle at Hudson. I mean, when the plane went down, how do you get back into a plane after you're in a plane crash, right? So what's the survival step there for people that are dealing with some sort of relatable experience? And that's where TEDx really launched me in a totally different path of trying to build more stories of survival and trauma and resilience, right? And I carry that into every day now.
How do you, most people hearing this are just, and you even said it earlier, like first responders, military people you've spoken to, they've gone through terrible things and they said they've never gone through what you went through. So even they can't understand intricately what it is. But just to the average person that will probably never experience that, but do still have trauma in their lives, because trauma can be whatever it is to that person, right? Like, and it can be very minor, on the outside, but to them it feels big. Like, what steps could you give or advice? Like just something simple, like, cause you've got it like down, like if you were to put it into third grade, cause that's kind of how we process stuff. Like what kind of steps would you give?
Yeah. First I would say recognize what you're going through. You're off that path of being normal in your mind, right? You're off the highway. There's something going on. I'm more irritable. I can't, I've got these headaches. I'm losing sleep. I'm having a hard time processing what just happened to me. Reach out and say something. It's not a sign of weakness to raise your hand, to stand up, to yell, to scream, to say, I need help. It's in our nature as human beings to help each other. It really is. Maybe it's not in everybody, but the majority of us really want to help. So first you have to be able to acknowledge and say something. I need help. Who can help me? And do a little bit of research in your own mind. What person do I know that's gone through some relatable experience? It doesn't have to be the same experience. And even if it is the same experience, that person might deal with what they're going through and their trauma and their aftermath differently because of what they grew up with, or maybe a separate experience that maybe prepared them for that trauma that just happened. You both could be in the same car accident, but maybe you've been in one before. Maybe your mom had been in one, or your dad, and you've gone through some sort of mental preparation for that in that moment, but the other person hasn't. And so the other person is really experiencing this, and you're looking at them going, God, just get over it. That's the worst thing that we can do as the peer supporter, right? Reach out. If you know someone has been knocked down through some form of trauma, reach out to them, touch base with them, text them. Hey, how you doing? It's uplifting. I've got a buddy, Chad Remidi, out in California. Man, that guy every day. How are you? What's going on? How are you feeling? Chad and I, we worked together, but we weren't great friends. He just reached out. John Frankel here in Plano, Texas. I mean, the guy's a multi-billionaire, and he reached out to me. I barely even met this man, but it just means so much. I mean, I can tell this story 7 years later, and I still tell these guys, like, you know how much that meant to me when you reached out and just asked how I was doing. So as a trauma victim, no matter what kind of it is, say something, recognize that you've already checked your tough box off. You've already experienced the tough part. You're tough. You don't need to go back and say anything. You're not weak. Say something, and then try to find some help. Researching therapy is really difficult. A lot of times we're trying to find a therapist through some form of like a yellow page directory, right? Where you get like a list of people, and some of these platforms are really good where you can see a video of the person. But when you're finding therapy, make sure it's relatable. You want to be able to go in, and I always say, get past the 8 seconds of what my trauma is like, right? If I'm 8 seconds in and I'm talking to Sean here and I'm like, okay, I've got to withhold information because I don't feel like I can talk to you because you're not going to be able to process what I'm saying, or I'm going to destroy your mind with what is about to come out of my mouth, then that's not a good connection. So I think you need to find that relatable therapist that has dealt with your type of trauma first, and then try to find out on the personality and characteristic piece. Do we match as people? And could we be almost friends at a time? Can I talk to you? And then talk about it. The more you talk about it, the more you're going to be able to process it. And the last part I would say with anyone that's dealing with any type of trauma is try to always keep that here. The last thing you ever really want to think about is, I'm going to put that trauma behind me. Because when you put that trauma behind you, that thing is always going to kick you in the butt. It's always going to knock you in the back of the skull when you walk back into that bar or that church or that crowded place. If your trauma is more about being in crowds, right? You get anxiety in crowds. If you don't have that trauma sitting out in front of you and realizing I have it, I'm accepting it. I openly admit I have trauma. I'm okay with that. So when I go into a crowded place now, that's here. And when I feel that sense of, like I mentioned earlier, the spidey sense, it creeps up on me, I'm starting to get anxiety. As long as that's here, I can bob and weave around it, right? But if I don't recognize that it's there, I'm only going to get the headaches at the end of the night. I'm only going to become more frustrated. And unfortunately, we have a lot of suicides in our society, and that's what happens. So
powerful, man.
Yeah, long story of it, but just say something first.
It's beautiful. That's a silver bullet. If someone was expecting some kind of like magical response to push a button, well, that doesn't exist. So the next best thing is, man, what you said, man, getting it out. So deeply appreciate you saying that, man. Who knows how many people that's going to help just hearing that. So really grateful.
Yeah.
Todd, man, we we're out of time already. These things keep getting faster and faster and faster. It seems like. So, man, you've been an inspiration. I appreciate your time, energy, and effort today. I appreciate you saying yes to coming on the podcast. And, man, keep serving, keep impacting, and you're making a difference, so just keep showing up. We all have our North Stars. And so I I think I have no doubt, man, this is going to impact hundreds and thousands of lives years to come. So we really appreciate you being on here today. We got two final thoughts. So first, how can we support you at Level Up and Live, and how can our audience and listeners support you, man?
Well, thank you for having me on. You guys are doing amazing work as well. If you go to toddblyleven.com, I've got a speaker website up there, my podcast, and what I'm doing in the mental health space. That's really tells you who I am. That's where you can find me on my socials, Todd Blyleven. I'm on all the social platforms, but toddblyleven.com allows you to really kind of get into what I'm passionate about and what we spoke about today.
Awesome.
Beautiful.
Second question, what does Level Up and Live mean to you?
Level Up and Live to me, what it means to me is basically getting up every day and leveling myself up to a place where I'm going to be happy internally, spiritually, and the living part is the consistency and the grind. It's recognizing that I've been through hell and back. I've been through muddy waters. I've lifted myself up. Now I'm going to live my consistency and try to stay in that happy place. Don't get too up. Don't get too down. Level yourself up to a place where you're comfortable and it's still inspiring and grinding, right? You don't want to get too high. Now you're too high. Now you're too leveled up. Stay in that perfect leveled up place that means a lot to you. So, yeah, thanks, guys, man. You guys are awesome.
Awesome, Todd, man. You're awesome human being, man, and we appreciate all the words.
Well, you too.
Level Up and Live.
Level Up and Live.
Thank you for joining us for another inspiring episode of the Level Up and Live podcast. A huge thank you to our guest, Todd, for sharing his wisdom and life experiences with us. If you found today's conversation with Todd impactful, be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode for more uplifting stories. Follow us on Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook for more content. And leave us a review and share this episode with a friend who could use some inspiration. Remember, in the face of adversity, resilience and faith can light the way to a brighter tomorrow.